afternoon. Welcome to EdSat Network. Friend, today we have lecture on Indian knowledge system and approaches in West. How the Indian knowledge system is being seen and their discussion on this topic, how the Indian knowledge system may be explored in different manners. So there are discussion on this topic. So for discussion on this topic, we have in the studio Dr. M.N. Thakur, a renowned political science thinker, and he teaches political science at Center for Political System in Jawaharlal Nehru University. So on your behalf, I welcome Dr. M.N. Thakur for EduSat lecture on the topic Indian knowledge system. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Ramanji. What I'm going to do today is I will be trying to map the approaches to Indian knowledge systems that is being adopted in the West. Generally, what happens during this period, the last month of the year, you have a lot of Indians coming to India, a lot of NRIs, both philosophers and others coming to India. Also, scholars in the West, they do come to India. In last couple of years, we have realized that many of them who come to India, they are showing deep interest in Indian knowledge tradition. So we thought that maybe it would be a good idea to see what are the major approaches that they adopt towards Indian knowledge system. When I say Indian knowledge system, what does that mean? Indian knowledge system would mean basically the classical Indian philosophical tradition, the classical Indian philosophy, the Ayurvedic medicine system, the philosophical traditions that emerged with the Islamic civilization in India, the kind of knowledge generated during the anti-colonial struggle. So you have a range of things together which you can call Indian knowledge system. Now, I am not going to deliver a detailed lecture on the idea of the Indian knowledge system per se. What I am going to do is, I am trying to see how the scholars in the West, they are looking at the Indian knowledge system. As we know, initially, the most prevalent approach about Indian knowledge system was that it was a matter of the past. It can be taken as something of archival value. It is a part of civilizational growth, and at some stage this was considered to be a pre-modern knowledge tradition. And with the advent of modernity, we have realized that this has become more or less irrelevant. One can keep them for archival reasons, one should read them also if needed, one can talk about that if possible, but they cannot be any source of knowledge. They were not knowledge systems. In fact, it was considered that it was basically a kind of a tradition. And at times when during the freedom struggle of India, some people tried to invoke that, some people tried to talk about that. It was considered that it was basically an act of revivalism. They wanted to revive the proud of India in order to make nationalism more acceptable. They tried to invoke certain kind of Indian knowledge system so that people can easily link themselves with that and Indian nationalism can take shape. So therefore, it was considered to be a kind of revivalism which was not needed after we got independence. After we got independence, in fact, the discourses on Indian knowledge system that emerged during colonial period more or less collapsed. You have Gandhi, you have Aurobindo, you have Tilak, you have Ram Mohan Roy, you have Vivekanand, you have n number of political activists, philosophers, thinkers who engaged with Indian knowledge tradition during the freedom struggle. But when it comes to post independence period, you find that the number went down drastically. One of the reasons was that the modern university system that was introduced in India did not have a very sympathetic attitude towards that. Under the Nehruvian regime, the modern university system overemphasized and in fact borrowed a lot of things from the Western university system, whereas the Western university system has moved on, and now it is much more widely open towards these kind of non-European traditions. In India, even now we think that this is not the case. Even now the Indian universities are not very open towards this. So, there are some researches in one university in one department or other on Indian knowledge system, but it is not taken as a source of knowledge anymore. Of late we have realized in last few years in fact, probably with the idea that India is now growing as a superpower, or it might grow as a superpower, and India is a huge economy or whatever, a lot of people seem to be interested in Indian knowledge system. There are a number of examples of this. You know that in many countries of Europe, the philosophies of classical Indian tradition are being introduced as subject. Nyaya philosophy has been introduced as subject. Sankhya is being introduced as subject of study. Many scholars in the world now looking towards this knowledge system, trying to extract something or other. In Germany particularly, many texts are being translated. There are huge projects translating some of the texts of Indian knowledge traditions. Particularly in Ayurveda, you will find in Germany there are a lot of work going on. So, there is a wide range of interest in Indian tradition that one can see. One of the streams of this tradition, one of the streams of this kind of resurgence of interest in the knowledge system goes back to the old approach, and you have people like Mirananda who think that this was all bogus, this was all religious. The knowledge, it was not a knowledge system, it was religion, which should be a matter of past, and what we have to talk about basically is the modern knowledge system, the modern science, and you have to overcome all this, and these were the consciousness of the past, and we should dump them. This is one of the most prominent approaches that you can easily see. I do not know to what extent these people have engaged with Indian knowledge system. I have no idea, but it seems that this approach is part of the larger colonial project that they are carrying forward either consciously or unconsciously. There is a possibility that they have not really examined the way Indian knowledge system does exist even today. One can't say that whatever existed in Indian knowledge system, let me say it in the beginning itself, one can't say that whatever existed in the Indian knowledge system are all good. One can't even say that there is no contradiction within this, there is nothing that one can think of as final truth in the Indian knowledge system. As like any other knowledge system, Indian knowledge system should also be taken as evolving system, incorporating a lot of contradictory situations. There is a power relationship that exists within that knowledge tradition. There is nothing called ideal and universal or anything, but take it as a knowledge system. That I think is a very important issue, but the first kind of approach does not take this as a knowledge system at all. They take it as if this was religion and to be discarded, and anybody who talks about any part of this as knowledge basically is trying to revive that thing, and it is a kind of Brahminical revivalism, or it is a kind of religious politics. So, all kind of points are being made. There is another kind of approach to this. Sheldon Pollock in Columbia University, he has a project, it is a big project called Death of Sanskrit. People like Sudipta Kaviraj, a political scientist from India, works with this project. Many other people are there. Jonathan Kennedy is there. So, these people have different take on Indian knowledge system. They are saying that yes, of course, it was a knowledge of the past. It was not only a religious tradition, but it was a knowledge tradition. The first thing that do accept, and that is the difference with the first and between the first and the second approach. They say that it is a knowledge system, but it is a thing of the past. It's almost a dead knowledge system. Now the task of the modern generation is to bring out whatever is possible from this dead knowledge tradition, and therefore they are approaching various texts, they are trying to read text, interpret text, rewrite text, and they think that in various fields of knowledge one can look into this tradition and appropriate some of the things to enrich the modern knowledge system. That is the second kind of approach, and you will find that Jonathan Gunnery has edited a book on Indian logic, several books on Indian logic. Pollock has series of articles and books on Indian knowledge tradition. Kaviraj is working on rasa theory and the modern aesthetics. So, this is one kind of approach that you come across very easily. The problem with the first approach is that it has not even taken into consideration the nature of the modern the traditional knowledge system. Despite not knowing anything about it, it is out to reject them. But the problem with the second is that it considers that this knowledge system is a dead knowledge system. It does not have any value at the present, except that it does retain lot of important insights. It does not consider, this approach does not consider that there is a possibility of constitution of a society based on this knowledge system, which can be a very different society. So, it only looks at this as a resource from where you can take something, but not as a vibrant knowledge system surviving in the world, producing a different kind of culture, giving a different kind of notion of humanity, giving a different kind of notion of society. The third approach is of a kind where they do consider that this is a knowledge system. It is still a vibrant knowledge system. It is a vibrant knowledge system in the sense that people in the country are still practicing this knowledge system and continuously contributing to this knowledge system. Ayurveda is a vibrant medicine system. The philosophies have, Indian philosophy is still acceptable. Many of the philosophical traditions emerged during the Mughal period, like Sufism and all, very popular even now. People do listen to them, people do meet experts of this, people do live their everyday life with the help of the experts of this knowledge system. So, therefore, it is very important to explore the local cultures. It is very important to see what is surviving in this local culture, and it is something of great importance. This approach, the third approach, would think that in the West there are many problems that they are facing, like conflict, and there is a possibility that those conflicts can be solved with the help of techniques of conflict resolution being used by people in India, and those techniques are basically drawn upon the traditional philosophy or Indian philosophy or Indian tradition or Indian knowledge system, whatever you call them. The problem with this approach is it does take into consideration that there is a very important segment of Indian knowledge system still surviving, but when it comes to apply grounds for testing the knowledge systems, then real problem begins, because they think the epistemology of testing the knowledge system has to be universal, modern, scientific. It's kind of Popperian model of knowledge. So, they say that, well, whatever practices you are doing, we will be interested in that, we would like to give an ear to that, we will try to understand what they are saying, but we will take them as knowledge if and only if that is tested on the grounds of modern knowledge system. This is an interesting idea, but a problematic idea. The problem with this is that different cultures have produced different kinds of epistemologies, and on what grounds should we think that there is a universal epistemology that is produced in the science, in the modern science? Even in modern science, if you go into the debates in modern science, you know Thomas Kuhn, who is suggesting that what is scientific, what is not, depends on how the community defines that. And there is a possibility of paradigm shift, and with the shift in paradigm, everything changes. It does not mean that science has changed, it does not mean that nature has changed. What has changed is what is being taken as the authentic knowledge. So, the paradigm shift is possible in different cultures too, and in that case different cultures have different epistemologies. Now, is it possible to test Indian culture or Indian knowledge system, Indian tradition of knowledge, on the paradigms defined by the tradition itself? That is the question. This is a big debate in Ayurveda, very big debate in Ayurveda. Some people say that Ayurveda should be tested on the grounds of modern medicine system. And what is the ground of the modern medicine system? That knowledge emerges from experiments. So, you have a hypothesis, then hypothesis can be tested through experiments and take n number of examples. If you reach to a sizable number of examples, then you can make that as theory, and that becomes your knowledge. Now, what happens in modern medicine? When a medicine is invented, it is tested in the lab, it is tested on animals first, then it is tested on human beings, and a good number of human beings are tested. Once it is approved, then it is sent to the market. The advantage of this kind of approach is that you can say that, well, whatever you are going to use has been scientifically tested on many people, and every time it has proved right, therefore, it is being used on me, and there is a possibility that it will be right. So, another advantage is that, well, if it fails, then one can go ahead, conduct more experiments, modify it further, and reach to a better medicine that can be useful. But the problem with this approach is at the basic assumption itself. What is the basic assumption? That if you have tested something on 1000 people, then you can assume that 1000 plus 1 people will also respond in the same way. This might not be true, because every individual may respond to something very differently. There could be geographical differences, there could be cultural differences, there could be biological differences, there could be many kinds of differences that will force the response, that will make the response differently. Now, if you have tested in so many cases, but that if you do that, probably it will be very costly. So, if you have tested on so many cases, then you can say that, well, this is correct, but even then it can never be tested on all the people. Therefore, it will always remain a realm of possibilities. So, what we claim as knowledge is not knowledge, it is only a probability or possibility. That is the position that today has become very important, that you cannot have any authentic scientific knowledge of anything. If that is true, then where is the claim that they make of scientificity? Where is the claim that they make of some medicine being more tested, therefore more authentic? Opposed to that, what happens in Indian tradition, it is assumed that the knowledge has really been revealed, knowledge has been given by God to the Vaidya, and the Vaidya then tries to use that. So, if he fails, it means that not that knowledge system has a problem, but it means that the person who has acquired knowledge has not acquired it properly. Now, this is a problematic situation, that you will never make an advance. You will always say that probably this is the best available thing and this is the final thing. But the truth is not so. Even in Ayurveda, people keep making experiments. I think there is a scope of experiments, and arriving on certain conclusions, but it's on a very long term basis. Epistemologically, they do not depend their finding, they do not depend their final formulations on the experiments alone. It has certain kind of insights, of course, it has certain kind of character which can't be very objectively defined, but then it has an experience with it which is a very long experience, and every time these experiences have been documented properly. So, what is important is the perception of the body, the perception of the medicine, the way they think of all these things, that is very important. So, maybe we can think of using the basis of knowledge available in one for the other and vice versa. But the more important thing is that this idea of the knowledge is rooted in the larger concept of the body, the larger concept of nature. So, there are possibilities that two different cultures have two different kinds of epistemologies, and in that case, if you try to test the other culture with one particular epistemology, you are bound to fail. Take for example the tribal communities. The tribal communities have this idea that land does not belong to any individual, it is a common resource, it is a common property, it is a common resource in fact. Now, if somebody who has no notion of common resource reaches to a tribal society, what will he see there? He will be completely confused. How can the resource be commonly owned? I think the idea that resource can be commonly owned is rooted in a larger context, and the larger context is how are you looking at the nature itself, how are you looking at the relation between human beings and nature. So, you cannot really ignore that larger context. So, therefore, if you are trying to look into other culture, there is a need to take the epistemological assumptions of other culture very seriously. I am not saying that therefore, there should be cultural relativism. I am not saying that. I do not think that. I think among the human beings of different cultures, there are certain things which are common, and those common things do produce common results, but there are many things also which are different, and those different things might produce different results. So, to argue that they are all common is as wrong as to argue that they are all different or completely different. I think the real thing exists somewhere between completely similar and completely different. So, this idea that the culture, different cultures have to conform to the modern Western scientific epistemology would be a problematic idea. Professor Bal Gangadhar, one of the professors in Brussels, suggests this kind of model, and I think there is a big problem with this. So, they have a project, a very big project, mostly in south of India, of exploring local culture. They are doing the exploration of local culture, but if you do not understand the epistemology around which the local culture is constituted, then there is a possibility that you will misappropriate that, you will misunderstand that. So, this is a real challenge for us. How do we understand these local cultures within the larger epistemology within which the culture is formulated? Because the larger epistemology itself is lost, as the experts who try to look at the local cultures do not have much idea of the larger epistemology. I will come to that a little later. There is a third kind of approach. A professor in McGill University, Arvind Sharma, adopts this kind of approach. He thinks that, well, we should actually do comparative religion or comparative culture. We can only compare. I think this is a good idea, because you do two things in this while comparing. One, that you evolve a very deep knowledge of your own culture, of your own society, of your own religion, of your own knowledge system, very deep rooted. And then you also have quite deep rooted knowledge of the other system, and then you are comparing them together. If you are comparing them together, you, by knowing the difference and similarity, you know each other a little better. That is the idea basically. So, comparative study of this kind, comparative study of philosophy, has emerged from this. Arvind Sharma himself has written a large number of books on Hindu philosophy and compared somewhere this with the Christian philosophy, the Western philosophy, or whatever. There is no doubt it's a nice approach, but the problem with this approach is that it starts with the colonized way of looking at things, because in the comparison what you do is simultaneously you also develop a standard, and that standard comes from the West, and that standard you think needs to be practiced, and therefore the fulcrum of the debate remains largely Western, modern and Western. It doesn't really get into the core idea of the other culture. For instance, somebody will write an article on comparison between Nagarjuna and Hegel, comparison between Shankar and Hegel, very commonly done, comparison between Ayurvedic medicine, so one of the texts of Ayurvedic medicine and one of the texts of the European medicine. So such kind of comparisons do not give much to us. It's good to have it in order to enhance our deep knowledge of both of them, but it doesn't give much to us, because it actually fails you in going deep to either of the two cultures. The whole study of comparison, the whole discipline of comparative study of religion or philosophy suffers from this problem. What we call comparison is not comparison, it is looking at one from the other point of view, despite the fact that we call it comparison. Now, there is a fourth approach, and there are some people in the West, may not be directly from philosophy departments or from academics, are deeply troubled by the way Indian philosophy and Indian religions are being taught in the universities. Deeply troubled. They think that the way it is being taught is a kind of distorted version of the original thing. Why it is distorted, why it is taught in this way, I don't think it is important at the moment. Maybe because they don't have this idea, maybe because they are not keen on it, maybe because they want to maintain that kind of colonial relationship of knowledge. So all possibilities are there, but this is true that is there, that this kind of discrimination is there. Not only that, people like Rajiv Malhotra, who would be one of the persons in this kind of category, goes on saying that the Western civilization is capable of absorbing other civilizations, and it absorbs in a way, appropriates in a way that you are left with nothing. It appropriates and then it starts claiming its authenticity, it's claiming its ownership. These are very, very interesting. This is a very interesting approach and a very interesting comment that he makes. He compares the Western culture, or meeting of two cultures, one powerful and one less powerful, by giving an analogy of tiger and a goat, that if a tiger eats a goat, what happens? Tiger appropriates the energy of the goat, becomes more powerful, but if somebody wants to look for goat's DNA inside the tiger's body, we are sure that it will fail. You cannot get any DNA, there is no DNA left there. So when a dominant culture absorbs the other culture, what it does is, it takes all the knowledge systems, all the important parts of the knowledge, and ultimately it denies the existence of the other. This has happened in a big way in the European world. N number of examples are there. You can take examples in philosophy, the whole school of Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, which was deeply influenced by Indian philosophy, but gradually it's matter of research, or somebody who does complete research can understand what kind of relationship was there, but in the common sense we don't have this idea that these great thinkers have appropriated from the Indian traditions. In fact, when one of the great philosophers called Jacques Derrida was asked, "Are you influenced by Indian philosophy?" He said, I don't know. We know that Hegel was a great critic of Indian philosophy, but we don't know that he was also deeply interested in Indian philosophy. You know that Delphi is a great philosopher, and he was impressed by Indian philosophy, but by now we don't know about that. So many of them have taken things from Indian philosophy, but gradually in the next generation it is completely forgotten. And the classical case is Pope Sylvester II of France, sometime in 1080 or 1010 AD. He was the Pope. He belongs to France. Now, he is the person who took the number system from India to Europe. You know, this number system, which is written as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, was not something that they knew earlier to that. They used to write numbers in Roman letters. And the problem with the Roman letter is that it cannot really be very useful when it comes to big calculations. For small calculations, small numbers, it is fine. But if a huge number, then it becomes a big problem. Now, the Europe, particularly when it was rising to power, when a lot of trade started in Europe, this became a big problem for them. So, at that moment, introduction of Indian number system to Europe was, I think, a revolutionary act. But what happens to Pope Sylvester II? That is very interesting to note. Pope Sylvester II is now considered as one of the devil soul. He is considered that it is argued, it is suggested that Pope has direct interaction with souls, and Pope was dealing in ghost. All kinds of things are said, just because probably he was capable of understanding the dynamics of this number system, the power of this number system. The problem goes to this extent that the Pope is symbolized as one of the problems in the church history, and his grave is taken as if is a grave of a devil person, where if any other pope falls ill, there will be that the Pope Sylvester II's the grave of Pope Sylvester II will become wet. If any pope is going to die, the symptom will be that the bones of Sylvester II will start cracking and it will produce some sound. Now, this is ridiculous. Why it is happening? I think in the West there has been a problem that it has colonized the rest of the world, and it is not accepting that what existed in these worlds was also a kind of knowledge system. Because once they accept this, their whole argument of burden of civilization will collapse completely. So they don't accept that. They think that these knowledge systems were actually religious systems. So you have this kind of approach of Rajiv Malhotra, who thinks that we need to highlight these differences. We need to understand that if our scholars are feeling discriminated in the academia of Europe and America, we should try to articulate why are they feeling discriminated. We should try to understand what is the difference between the way we think and the way Europe and America thinks. They think. So this difference, Rajiv Malhotra thinks, is quite crucial. But this is something that will keep the DNA of this culture always present in the body of the dominant culture. And he gives an example. The example is yoga. He says that some of the traditions of India have certain concepts which cannot be translated. So many of the concepts, many of the materials, many of the resources have been translated to the Western knowledge system and ultimately made part of that, and the origin of that is almost denied. It is being converted into European knowledge system. This is going very fast, except in some places, in some cases, where it is just not possible to digest that particular concept. And he gives an example of yoga. Yoga is something which can't be anything but Indian. The Americans have experimented with this. They have introduced power yoga, they have introduced creative yoga, they have introduced n number of yogas, but yoga remains at the center of this. That word they cannot, the moment they eliminate that word, the moment they translate that word, the meaning is different. So, they have to retain that word. So, therefore, in future, if large number of knowledge resources are appropriated and translated by those countries, even then, if some of them will retain its own original form, we will at least know that from where it has flown. Very few people today would believe that the Greek philosophy was deeply impressed by Indian philosophy of that time. Very few people will believe that the Arab philosophers were the pioneers in the field of science, not the Western science, not the Western scholars. Now, these are things which Rajiv Malhotra suggests that we should keep in mind while looking at the Indian tradition, and we need to engage with Indian tradition, because this is a huge resource that is available to us. Before it vanishes, before it is appropriated by the Western culture, before it is completely dumped, we must try to engage with it, appropriate it, collect it, document it, research on it, whatever you want to do. You have to do that. Now, what is how do we understand all four of them? You know, we have already discussed the problem of the first, we have discussed the problem of the second, and we have discussed the problem of the third. The problem with this last approach is that there is a feeling among the people who read Rajiv's works or who read works of that kind, that this project is actually located in the identity politics in the West. There is a possibility, and I'm almost being convinced, that many of the texts being written by contemporary thinkers in the West, contemporary Indian thinkers in the West, be it Amartya Sen or Sudipta Kaviraj or many of them, they are product of certain kind of complex that these scholars are carrying forward with them in the European world or the European and American world due to being Indian, and they want to assert that India has a huge knowledge system. Now, there is no harm in this kind of politics of identity. I think it is very important to have this kind of politics of identity, because this will bring forth many cultures available in the different parts of the world, if they are conscious of their own culture. But the problem is that once you fall in the trap of the identity politics, there is a tendency to ignore the internal contradictions of the system. There is a tendency to get into this whole idea that we already had all knowledge possible. I think that would be a wrong way of handling it. Let us accept that we had a knowledge system which might be different than the European knowledge system, and European knowledge system has developed a lot in last few hundred years. It has developed various techniques and methods. The world has changed, there are new problems, and any of the methods which are not modern methods will have certain kind of problem in explaining the contemporary world. But that does not mean that contemporary world cannot be the ancient or the traditional knowledge system or the Indian knowledge system has no relevance for the contemporary world. I think there are two kinds of relevance. One is that there are dimensions which have not been have not been explored by the Western world, can be explored with the help of these knowledge traditions. This is what many of them would argue. Rajiv would argue very much about it, that well, even the management can be done better if we mix the modern management techniques with the ancient Indian techniques. or ancient Indian philosophy. There are certain doctors like Dr. Manchanda from AIMS who suggest that the notion of the body in the Indian tradition is very interesting. And if a doctor, a heart specialist, takes that as a notion of the body, then there is a possibility that he will treat the patient very differently. In fact, the hospital where he works, the Gangaram Hospital, there is a yoga unit for heart patients, and he thinks that that works very well. So he has a full page on why yoga is important for them. So it is not to say that the Western knowledge system is bad and East versus West kind of politics is there and we have to really deny them. What I am proposing is, what I think we need to do is that we have to understand that there has to be a democratic dialogue between these traditions. There got to be democratic dialogue. If there is no democratic dialogue between them, there will be a big problem. We will fall into the identity politics, or we will fall into rejecting this completely, the old colonial discourse. So how do we establish a dialogue? Obviously, for dialogue, what you need to have is at a very equal level of discussion. You have to first assume very clearly that different societies, different human conglomerations in different parts of the world, in different geographical areas of the world, produce different kinds of knowledge systems. And it is possible to understand, it is possible to accept, you don't need much labor to accept this, bring home this point that human beings are creative beings and they respond to the environment, and wherever they live in different parts, whenever they live in different parts of the world, wherever they live, they develop certain kind of knowledge system based on their immediate experiences. Now, if the same area suddenly starts having a new kind of experience, obviously the old knowledge system will not be able to handle that. But that does not mean that all kind of knowledge that it has accumulated are useless knowledge. That does not mean that that kind of knowledge which they produced by their own engagement with circumstances are not useful. So both of them might be useful. Similarly, if other part of the world start facing similar problems that was there in that particular geographical area, then probably the other part of the world will have to appropriate knowledge from that particular geographical area. That is the point. So at one level, let us assume that all these knowledge systems are standing on, say, at the same level, and then they need to be engaged and democratically engaged. You reject and accept and engage in dialogue, not on the basis of the colonial relationship, the relation of domination and dominated, but on the basis of what you call a democratic relationship. That is the first thing. The second thing is that you have to understand that at some stage, one particular model of social system or life process has emerged in Europe, and that model gradually became widely accepted. But that could not be the only model of human existence. And once now that model is in crisis, then probably we need to look for other models. And where are the other models? Those other models are available in these non-European worlds, including India. Therefore, we should engage with them at that level, at the level of looking for new models of life, which can be completely different than the model of life that emerged in Europe. We may not need capitalism, we may need something else. We may transform the life process in a way that this is the urban-based society will vanish and we have a new kind of model of rural-based society. We do not know. My only assertion is that these different models of human existence should be taken seriously and should be taken simultaneously and should be taken democratically. That is the basic idea. So these are the four. What I did is I talked about 4 different models, and then I gave critique of them, and then I proposed a 5th model which could be a better model of looking at these approaches, this Indian knowledge tradition. Thank you.
So, do you think these to be feasible or likely to be taken up seriously, or the people as and they have been taking it that just for the purpose of for the sake of looking at the past and digging our treasures, but not seriously to give into the kind of model or for the benefit of the.
I think at the moment the approaches I have spoken about, they do not talk about the alternative model.
Okay.
Partly because I think all four models I am talking about have emerged in the West. That is the model of the people located in the West, either Western or Indian or NRIs, whatever, but they are all located there. Now, the fact that they are looking into Indian tradition, it only shows that there is a problem in that culture, and they are going deep into it.
But
And
these are the
therefore,
probable reason for that, looking at Indian tradition.
that is one of the reasons that they all are interested in this,
Okay.
because all they are funded and they come here and they talk about it. They are also interested in hearing them. So these are the people who are our representative in those world. So
Okay.
they are taken there as experts. Though they come here, they take something, they engage in dialogue, they take things from here. But I think that time has come when these the problems of these four approaches have to be understood, and all these four kinds of people have to sit down and engage in a debate themselves about how to look into Indian system.
Is this because of their own interest, or they find some kind of difficulty in the other culture, or because of the people of that country, they want to know about the India and they fail to answer them? That's why they are looking at Indian tradition and
I
want
think
to know all
both.
this.
I think both. It could be both ways. There is a possibility that there is an identity politics, and therefore they are facing trouble of this identity that we are Indian and India has such a huge thing. They all know that India has such a huge thing, and therefore they want to know about it. Like a Marxist professor from India, Sylvester himself,
Okay.
went to Russia,
Mhm.
spoke on Marxism,
Mhm.
Marxist theory of state. At the end of the lecture, nobody asked him anything about Marxist theory of state,
Okay.
but everybody asked him, what do you think is yoga? Which means that they also have a kind of understanding that what an Indian can contribute to the world culture.
It means the people are having their own interest and they are forcing a scholar to look at the things.
I think so. This is a situation that they are creating the situation in which Indian scholars are supposed to look into this.
Okay.
That's what is happening, it looks like.
So, one thing is that they are the setting agenda. Now the terms and condition will prevail there, or the what we have in our traditions. Like as you said, when the Western thing set the standard, but the answer or what we can say the solution we find from the Indians is like put Ayurveda and modern system of medicine. If Ayurveda cures the diseases, what is the harm of adopting them? But if we go through the modern medicinal system, they might fail to solve give the proper result or the expected result.
Yeah. That is true. That is a matter of debate, I think. That's why I'm saying that what they have to do is they have to understand that this knowledge system has its own epistemology. The first task is to understand that nature of the epistemology and understand the knowledge system from that epistemological point of view.
Okay.
Then only you can engage in a good debate. Otherwise, what you will do is, I will have my assumptions and I will try to examine you with the help of my assumptions, and I will decide about you from my assumptions, which would mean that maybe I will not be able to understand what you are saying at all.
Okay.
Isn't it? The first task is to understand that. Then you can decide, well, there can be some universally arrived proposition of knowledge, and one can work on that. There is no harm in this.
One thing which I like to know about that, when the first civilization, it was the Sindhu Indus civilization, that was urban-based civilization. After that, about 2000 years, it has been almost a rural-based society in India. Only in the last century, we witnessed the number of cities and the urban centers are coming up and growing. So, what could be this region? And the other thing with this, all the people, all the rich people now are preferring to go to the villages, living into the farmhouses and live like life like old age become kisans of India, farmers of India were doing. So this pattern, this shift in the lifestyle, where from here, where will go?
No, you know what is happening today? I think people are fed up with this urban-based civilization. We all know that it is very difficult, but also that the facilities are available here. We don't want to leave. Now, second phase is coming, where, like Indian President announced earlier, the earlier President of India, that create urban facilities in the rural areas, so that we can go there and stay. That's the second phase. That is also not great, because what you are going to do is we are going to convert rural area into urban areas, semi-urban areas. I think what is important is to recognize the importance of the rural way of life. It is important to recognize that this was also
you are talking about the concept Pura.
Pura, yeah. What is important, we need to enter into the third phase, where we recognize that, look, there was a system of living which was like a village, where there was no violence, very less violence, maybe some caste system emerged at some stage, maybe some things would have been done to eliminate that caste system completely. There were problems. I'm not saying that there were no problems in that, but still I think it was not like the urban areas. And if you convert those villages into suburban areas, that becomes much more dangerous, because this is like a transition society. In the urban areas, laws are at least properly followed. In the suburban areas, you have more crime, where your police is less effective. So therefore, I think that task is to recognize the importance of the rural civilization, the civilizational importance of the rural areas, and then assert its autonomy and its possibility of return of this kind of civilization.
Okay. So, well friends, we conclude the lecture here. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on your behalf I thank Dr. M. N. Thakur for giving such an insightful and wonderful lecture on the topic Indian knowledge system. Thank you very much.
Thank you.